Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the cradle of civilization itself, where rivers twist like serpents and the first humans clawed their way from savagery to something resembling society. But trust me, it's more nightmare than nursery rhyme. Imagine this: did you know that over 10,000 years ago, in a land squeezed between two raging rivers, people built the world's oldest city walls not for glory, but to fend off floods that could swallow whole villages in a single night, leaving survivors to fish out bloated corpses from the muck? What if I told you that these early settlers domesticated wild grains by accident, turning starvation into surplus, only to birth inequalities that make modern wealth gaps look like playground squabbles? And here's the creepy part: historians still whisper about mysterious plastered skulls found in ancient homes, faces reconstructed from the dead, staring blankly as if judging the living for their endless hunger. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this sleepy little time machine reaches. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the gritty sand grinding under your bare feet as you trudge through the whispering winds of the Fertile Crescent, that deceptive paradise between the Tigris and Euphrates, where the air hangs heavy with the metallic tang of river mud, like iron filings scraping against your teeth every time you breathe in too deeply. The sun beats down mercilessly, turning your skin into a taut drumhead that throbs with each step, and you wonder if this is how it all began, humanity's grand experiment starting not with a bang, but with the slow, gnawing ache of hunger that twists your gut like a forgotten ghost clawing its way back to life. You squat in the shadow of a crude mud hut, its walls slapped together from sun-baked clay that crumbles under your fingers, leaving sticky residue that smells faintly of decay, as if the earth itself resents being shaped by human hands. Around you, small bands of hunter-gatherers huddle, their eyes hollow from seasons of chasing elusive gazelles across barren plains, and you join them, your stomach rumbling louder than the distant thunder, forcing you to chew on tough roots that taste like dirt mixed with regret. It's ironic, isn't it? How these first settlers thought they were taming the wild, but really, the wild was taming them, much like how you scroll endlessly on your phone today, thinking you're in control, only to realize it's devouring your time worse than any ancient famine. You watch as an elder woman, her hands calloused and cracked like old leather, experiments with wild wheat stalks, selecting the ones with fatter seeds by sheer desperation, not knowing she's kick-starting the Neolithic revolution around 10,000 BCE, when the Ice Age finally loosens its frozen grip and the climate warms just enough to make staying put seem less suicidal. But oh, the hardship bites deep. You feel the chill of night seeping through your threadbare animal skins, wet wool clinging to your shivering frame from an unexpected drizzle, turning what should be shelter into a damp prison where mold creeps up the walls like insidious fingers. Historians still argue whether Jericho's massive stone walls, rising 11 feet high and 6 feet thick by 8000 BCE, were built for defense against raiders, or just to hold back the Jordan River's wrath. But as you help haul those heavy stones, your back screaming in protest, you know it's both a futile barrier against nature's indifference and human greed. Suddenly, a physical jolt hits you. A wild aurochs charges from the brush, its horns glinting like bronze daggers, and you dive aside, heart pounding, scraping your knees on sharp rocks that draw blood tasting salty and metallic, mingling with the iron on your teeth from the dusty air. It's a shocking reminder of how precarious life is here. One wrong move, and you're trampled, your body left for vultures, while the survivors domesticate its kin into cattle, milking them for sustenance that barely staves off the constant hunger pangs. You empathize with these early farmers, their faces etched with lines from endless toil, as they gather around flickering torchlight that casts elongated shadows on the hut walls, dancing like accusatory spirits judging your every failure. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the vast crescent of fertile land stretches before you, like a deceptive emerald scar on the earth's brown hide, whispering promises of abundance while hiding the bones of those who trusted too much. And here's an absurd tidbit: these folks use sheep bladders inflated as flotation devices during floods, bobbing like macabre balloons on raging waters, a far cry from your modern life jacket, but equally desperate. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about blowing up your problems, Worse than inflating your ego on social media only to watch it pop. But the sadness creeps in softly. You see a child, no older than 5, succumb to malnutrition, his tiny frame wasting away in the hut's dim corner, eyes glazing over as the family mourns with quiet wails that echo your own inner chill. It's a light sarcasm that bubbles up nature's way of population control, more efficient than any HR layoff, yet heartbreaking in its cruelty. As you rise to forage again, the wind picks up, carrying the scent of distant mountains where wild barley waits, but your feet ache from thorns embedded like persistent doubts, and you question if this endless cycle of gather and grind is worth the fleeting warmth of a full belly. The mud hut shadows lengthen, swallowing the last rays of sun, leaving you in a twilight haze where hunger's ghost lingers, its cold breath on your neck reminding you that civilization's birth was bathed in sweat and starvation. Not glory. You press on, drawn by the faint glow of communal fires ahead, where stories of survival are traded like precious beads. But deep down, a psychological chill settles. What if this hunger never truly ends, just evolves into something more insidious, like the empty feeling after binge-watching a series that promises escape but delivers only void? The rivers murmur secrets in the dark, their waters lapping at the banks with a rhythm that mocks your fatigue, and you wonder, as the stars emerge like indifferent eyes, if taming this land means losing a piece of your soul to its unyielding grasp. In another poetic zoom-out, the crescent moon hangs low, a silver sickle harvesting the night's silence, mirroring the tools you'll soon forge from necessity's forge. But for now, the sensory struggle intensifies. Wet wool chafes against your raw skin. The iron taste grows stronger with each parched swallow, and torchlight flickers weakly, illuminating faces gaunt with the same eternal question. How much more can you endure before the dawn brings not relief, but another day of back-breaking labour? You huddle closer to the group, sharing a meagre meal of ground pistachios that stick to your teeth like accusations, and as sleep tugs at your eyelids, the wind's whisper of changes coming, settlements growing, huts clustering into something resembling permanence, yet the injustice of it all simmers beneath. Why do some hoard the surplus while others scrape by? A debate as old as these rivers themselves. Historians ponder if the first social hierarchies emerged from these very inequalities, born of who controlled the granaries, much like today's billionaires gatekeeping resources while the rescue for scraps. You feel a sardonic smile crease your lips, humanity's first pyramid scheme, where the base toils and the top reaps, worse than any multi-level marketing scam. The night deepens, and a shocking element unfolds. A raid from neighbouring nomads shatters the fragile peace, their shadows darting like wolves, stealing what little stores you've amassed, leaving you with bruises blooming like dark flowers on your arms, and a sad resignation that trust is as fleeting as the river's calm. Empathy wells up for these ancestors, their resilience forged in fire, yet sarcasm laces your thoughts. Congratulations, you've invented community, complete with all the drama of a neighbourhood HOA meeting gone wrong, as you bind your wounds with strips of reed. The absurd tidbit surfaces early healers used honey as an antibiotic, slathering it on cuts with sticky fingers, a sweet irony against the bitterness of survival. The mud hut envelopes you in its earthy embrace, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and smouldering embers, and you drift toward uneasy slumber, haunted by the gnawing hunger that promises tomorrow's trials will test you further. The river's endless flow a metaphor for time's relentless march. But in this moment, as torchlight dims to embers, casting grotesque shapes on the walls, a strange visual image lingers, the plastered skull of an ancestor, unearthed from beneath the floor, its empty socket staring back, as if asking why you persist in this cycle of pain and progress. Did you know that around 9000 BCE, in these treacherous Mesopotamian marshes, early humans accidentally bred the first domesticated barley by repeatedly harvesting the same stubborn plants, turning a desperate scramble for food into the spark that ignited cities, but also cursed them with floods that claimed more lives annually than any predator? Leaving bloated remains tangled in reeds like forgotten warnings, you plunge knee-deep into the reedy marshes, the slimy water sucking at your legs with a cold, insistent grip that sends shivers racing up your spine, and the sharp edges of wild grasses slice into your fingers as you grasp at clusters of barley. blood welling up in tiny crimson beads that mix with the murky slime, tasting faintly of iron on your tongue when you instinctively lick the wounds, a metallic tang that evolves from the dusty plains bite into something wetter, more insidious, like rust dissolving in floodwater. The air hums with the buzz of insects swarming your sweat-slicked skin, their bites raising itchy welts that burn like accusations, and you stumble forward, chasing that elusive dream of a full belly, your stomach a hollow void that growls louder than the approaching thunder, forcing you to ignore the pain in your hands as you yank at the stubborn stalks, their husks refusing to yield easily. A cruel joke from nature that these life-giving plants fight back harder than any modern diet fad promising quick results, but delivering only frustration. It's ironic, isn't it? How you're here pioneering agriculture, yet it feels like grinding through an endless level in a video game where the boss is famine itself, respawning every season worse than lagging on a bad Wi-Fi connection. You join a cluster of weary figures, their bodies bent like question marks over the marshy soil, experimenting with selective harvesting, picking the grains that don't shatter and scatter, unknowingly laying the groundwork for the Ubaid period around 6500 BCE, when pottery emerges as a game-changer, those fired clay vessels holding water without leaking. But right now, your crude woven baskets overflow with the meager haul, sodden from the rising tides that lap higher with each passing hour. A physical surge hits as the floodwaters swell suddenly, the river's betrayal catching you off guard, forcing you to scramble up a muddy embankment, your feet slipping in the filth that clings like guilt, and you lose half your gathered grains to the churning brown torrent, a shocking loss that leaves you gasping, chest heaving with the sad weight of wasted effort. Empathy flooding in for these ancestors who traded nomadic freedom for this rooted misery. Their faces mirrored in yours, etched with the quiet despair of knowing one bad season could erase everything. Historians still debate whether the shift to farming was a blessing or a trap, some arguing it slashed lifespans by introducing diseases from crowded settlements, others claiming it birthed innovation out of sheer survival panic. But as you claw your way to higher ground, wet wool now mutated into sodden reeds wrapped around your torso for meager warmth chafes against your raw skin, amplifying the sensory struggle into a full-body itch that crawls like invisible parasites burrowing deeper. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the marshes spread before you like a vast, breathing lung of the earth, inhaling river silt and exhaling fragile life, a deceptive cradle where abundance hides in the folds of peril. And here's an absurd tidbit these early farmers used fermented grain mash not just for bread but as a primitive beer, sloshing in gourds that doubled as crude fermenters, a boozy escape from the drudgery that probably led to the first hangovers, far messier than your weekend regrets after too many craft brews. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself humanity's first happy hour, sponsored by desperation, better than therapy but with more vomiting into the reeds. But the sadness deepens as you spot an elderly gatherer slip into the flood, her frail form vanishing beneath the waves with barely a ripple, her family wailing from the bank, a light dramatization of loss that chills you to the core, reminding you how fragile this new way of life is, where staying put means gambling everything on the river's moods. Empathy surges for her, a woman who might have been your kin in another time, her knowledge of edible plants lost forever, much like how modern extinctions erase indigenous wisdom faster than we can document it. The torchlight now flickering from distant campfires on safer ground casts elongated shadows across the water, mutating into wavering phantoms that dance mockingly, illuminating the injustice of it all. Why do the floods favour some patches of land while devouring others? A cosmic lottery rigged against the vulnerable you press on, hauling your salvaged grains back to the cluster of round huts at Abu Huraira, where around 8,000 BCE communities like this swell to hundreds, sharing the burden but also the diseases that breed in close quarters, your throat scratchy from the damp air that carries hints of rot. A modern comparison slips in, it's like cramming into a packed subway during rush hour, bodies pressed together breeding germs. But here the stakes are starvation instead of just missing your stop. Sarcasm bubbles up again. Congratulations on inventing society, complete with all the perks of communal living like sharing lice and grudges over who hoarded the best seeds. As you dry your bleeding fingers by the fire, Wrapping them in leaves that sting like antiseptic, the group experiments with grinding stones, pounding the grains into coarse flour that sticks to your teeth, a factual nod to how this tedious process evolves into the first bread, fueling the energy for building irrigation ditches that tame the floods, at least temporarily. But the sensory struggle persists. The iron taste now mingles with the gritty flour, turning each swallow into a chore, and wet reeds evolving from wool's dampness cling to your legs like persistent regrets, chafing with every move. In another poetic zoom-out, the stars wheel overhead like indifferent witnesses, their patterns tracked by elders who debate omens in the constellations, foreshadowing the astronomy that will one day map empires. A shocking element unfolds as a flash flood roars back, sweeping away a neighbouring hut in the night, the screams cutting through the darkness like knives, leaving you wide-eyed and trembling, the sad reality that for every step forward in domestication, nature claims its toll in lives, a balance sheet written in mud and tears. You huddle with survivors, sharing warmth that barely combats the chill seeping into your bones, and sarcasm whispers Mother Nature's tough love, more brutal than a bad breakup text at 2 a.m. The absurdity peaks with tales of using duck feathers as makeshift bandages for cuts, quacking their way into early medicine, a feather-light solution to heavy problems. Historians argue over whether these floods accelerated innovation or just bred resilience through trauma. But as you rebuild the next dawn, stacking mud bricks with aching hands, the injustice grates. The rich silt deposited by the waters enriches the soil for future crops, yet buries the poor in unmarked graves. Empathy for the lost swells, their stories dissolving like silt in the current, much like forgotten workers in today's gig economy, grinding away for scraps while the system floods them out. The marshes murmur secrets, their reeds rustling like conspirators, and you chase that full belly onward, planting selected seeds in experimental plots, unaware you're sowing the seeds of civilization's double-edged sword abundance laced with inequality. But the psychological chill deepens. What if this dream of plenty is just an illusion? The rivers always one swell away from washing it all clean, leaving you to start over in the muck. The campfire torchlight dims, mutating into dawn's hazy glow that paints the floods in golden deception. And you rise, fingers still throbbing, to face another day where hunger's pursuit feels eternal. The waters rising once more on the horizon like an unspoken threat. Did you know that by 3500 BCE, in the blistering heart of Uruk, Mesopotamian scribes etched over 5,000 symbols into clay tablets, inventing the world's first writing system not for poetry or love letters, but to track grain debts and cattle trades, turning human thoughts into permanent traps that could outlast empires, yet doom the illiterate to eternal exploitation? You grip the damp clay tablet in your palms, its surface slick and gritty like congealed blood mixed with river silt, scratching raw lines into your skin as you press the reed stylus deeper in the sweltering heat of a Sumerian workshop, the air thick with the acrid smell of baking mud ovens that singes your nostrils, evolving that iron tang on your teeth into something sharper, like biting down on a rusted nail laced with the sweat of endless labour. The sun filters through reed mats overhead, casting stifling shadows that press on your shoulders like invisible weights, and you carve these wedge-shaped secrets, cuneiform marks tallying barley rations or temple offerings, while divine whispers seem to slither from the clay itself, promising power through knowledge, yet delivering only back-breaking toil that bends your spine into a perpetual question mark, your fingers cramping into claws that ache with each precise incision, a sensory struggle that crawls up your arms like fire ants burrowing under the skin. It's ironic, isn't it, how you're birthing literacy here in the late Ubaid to Uruk transition, around 4000 BCE, when pictographs evolve into abstract signs capable of recording speech. But it feels like scrolling through endless terms of service agreements today, clicking agree without grasping how it binds you tighter than any chain. A physical jolt comes as the tablet slips from your sweaty grasp, shattering on the baked earth floor with a sharp crack that echoes like a bone snapping, forcing you to start over, kneeling to gather the fragments while dust coats your tongue, mingling with the mutated iron taste now infused with clay's earthy bitterness, and you feel the shocking frustration of lost work, a sad echo of scribes who slaved in temple schools, memorizing hundreds of signs from age 7, Their youth ground away in dim rooms, much like interns burning out on unpaid overtime in corporate cubicles. Historians still argue whether cuneiform's invention spurred social progress or just entrenched hierarchies, some claiming it democratized information while others point to how it empowered elites to hoard secrets, leaving commoners like you illiterate and voiceless, a debate that lingers in the faded impressions of unearthed tablets. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the sprawling city of Uruk unfurls around you like a labyrinthine scar on the plain, its mud-brick walls pulsing with the heartbeat of 50,000 souls, where innovation breeds isolation in equal measure. And here's an absurd tidbit: early scribes used fish bones as makeshift styluses when reed splintered, scraping scales off carp from the Euphrates to fashion tools that smelled faintly of rot, a fishy shortcut to eternity's records, far quirkier than your autocorrect mishaps on a smartphone keyboard. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about hooking knowledge, reel it in only to watch it flop away in bureaucratic nonsense, worse than fishing for compliments on a bad date. But the sadness seeps in as you glimpse a fellow scribe, an old man whose eyes have dimmed from years of squinting in poor light, collapsing from exhaustion beside his unfinished ledger, his body hauled away like discarded clay, a light dramatization of how this gift of writing claimed lives through overwork, empathy welling for him as you imagine his unrecorded dreams vanishing like smoke, much like forgotten bloggers today whose words drown in the digital deluge. The wet wool motif mutates here into damp reed mats draped over your shoulders for meager shade, soaking up your sweat and chafing like a persistent itch that mirrors the injustice of it all. Why do priests and kings dictate what you carve, their divine whispers turning your toil into tools of control? While you starve on meager rations, empathy surges for the voiceless masses outside, farming the fields that feed this growing beast of a city, their backs breaking under the same sun that bakes your tablets dry. A modern comparison hits. It's like being a content creator, grinding out videos for algorithms that favor the elite, your efforts monetized by others while you scrape by on views, a cycle as old as these rivers. Sarcasm laces your thoughts, again divine inspiration. My foot more like godly micromanagement, complete with eternal deadlines and no overtime pay. As you resume carving, revisiting the elder woman from the marshes, now a hazy memory twisted into a temple priestess who hoards grain tallies, her once desperate hands now wielding power over distributions. A surprising twist where survival's victor becomes the oppressor. You feel the torchlight flickering from oil lamps nearby, mutating into harsh oven glow that casts grotesque shadows on the walls, illuminating stacks of tablets that record everything from beer recipes to land deeds. A factual integration of how writing standardizes trade around 3200 BCE, fostering the first true urban economy. Urban, but the sensory struggle intensifies. The heat warps the clay too quickly, forcing rushed strokes that blur your vision with sweat-stinging eyes, and you battle the urge to smash it all, the injustice grating as scribes like you, often from elite families, gatekeep this power, leaving farmers illiterate and at mercy of misread tallies. In another poetic zoom-out, the Euphrates glimmers beyond the city like a silver vein threading through the earth's flesh, carrying whispers of distant trades that promise wealth but deliver dependence. The shocking element unfolds when an overseer lashes out with a reed whip for your shattered tablet, the sting blooming across your back like fire, a sad reminder of how knowledge's dawn came wrapped in coercion, empathy for the beaten boy apprentice nearby whose whimpers echo your inner pain, a dramatized glimpse into the child labor that fueled this revolution. You bind the wound with a strip of linen, sarcasm whispering education's price tag, steeper than student loans and twice as scarring. The absurdity shines through in how they sealed important tablets in clay envelopes, like ancient spam filters, baking them to prevent tampering, a quirky safeguard against fraud in an era of verbal trusts. Historians ponder if this system's complexity limited literacy to a scribal class, debating whether it stifled or sparked cultural growth. But as you finish the day's quota, palms throbbing with fresh scratches, the divine whispers fade into mocking silence, leaving you with the chill of realization power through words is a double-edged stylus, cutting both ways. The workshop dims as evening falls, torchlight now sputtering in clay lamps that smell of fish oil, casting wavering phantoms on the piled tablets, and you step out into the cooling air, the river's distant roar a lullaby laced with threat, wondering if these carved secrets will liberate or enslave, the mood shifting to weary anticipation as the city's hum beckons you toward the towering structures, rising in the distance like accusatory fingers pointing skyward. Did you know that around 3100 BCE, in the shadow of Sumer's colossal ziggurats rising up to 100 feet like artificial mountains baked from 1,000,000 bricks, workers like you labored under divine mandates to build these stairways to the gods? But archaeologists estimate the toll included thousands crushed by falling loads or dying from heat stroke, their bodies buried in the foundations as unwitting sacrifices to progress. You heave another sun-scorched brick onto your aching shoulders, the rough clay biting into your flesh like 1,000 tiny teeth, drawing beads of sweat that sting open blisters and mix with the dust to form a gritty paste that cakes your skin, turning the iron tang on your tongue now mutated into the chalky bitterness of baked earth laced with salt from your own exertion into a constant reminder of how the gods' demands grind mortals down to powder under this relentless Mesopotamian sun. The towering ziggurat of Uruk looms over you like a judgmental colossus, its stepped platforms climbing toward the heavens in arrogant tiers, forcing you to haul these endless loads up ramps slick with spilled mortar, your muscles screaming in protest as the heat warps the air into shimmering waves that blur your vision. A sensory struggle that crawls down your back like molten lead. Every step a battle against collapse while priests chant from above, their voices echoing like mocking echoes in a vast, empty chamber. It's ironic, isn't it, how you're constructing these monuments to divine favor around 2900 BCE, when ziggurats evolved from simple platforms into multi-level behemoths, dedicated to gods like Inanna or Enki. Yet it feels like building a corporate skyscraper today, where the CEOs atop hoard the views while you, the laborer, get buried in the basement of exhaustion. Worse than climbing stairs in a power outage with groceries in both hands. A physical catastrophe strikes as the ramp beneath you buckles under the weight of too many haulers, sending bricks tumbling like an avalanche of hardened regret, and you dive aside just in time, scraping your knees raw on jagged edges that draw blood tasting of defeat, the shocking chaos leaving a fellow worker pinned under the debris, his gasps fading into sad silence as overseers shrug it off as the gods will, empathy flooding you for him, a nameless soul whose family will mourn with empty hands, much like construction accidents today where safety nets fail and corporations cite acts of God to dodge blame. Historians still debate whether these ziggurats served purely as religious centers or doubled as administrative hubs for grain storage and taxation, some arguing their elevation symbolized cosmic hierarchy, while others see them as tools for kings to legitimize hoarding spoils through divine proxy. A contention unearthed from temple ruins that whisper of buried tensions. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the flat alluvial plain stretches endlessly around you like a vast, thirsty tongue lapping at the sky, the ziggurat a defiant tooth piercing the blue, where human ambition mocks the river's meandering humility. And here's an absurd tidbit. Builders mix straw with mud for stronger bricks, but in desperate times, they used human hair clippings as binding fibre, turning personal trimmings into eternal parts of the structure, a hairy foundation quirkier than recycling old socks into insulation for your drafty apartment. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about leaving a piece of yourself at work, literally woven into the boss's grand vision, better than donating plasma but with more eternal commitment. But the sadness deepens as you revisit the old scribe from the workshop, now twisted in your memory as a temple administrator overseeing quotas, his once trembling hands now firm in doling out meager rations to haulers like you. A surprising betrayal where the oppressed becomes oppressor, climbing the social ladder on bricks you laid. Empathy waning into resentment as you realize survival's twist often carves deeper scars than any flood. The wet wool motif mutates into sweat-soaked linen wraps around your torso, clinging like a second skin that chafes with every heave, amplifying the injustice of it all. Kings, like those in Kish or Lagash, hoard the temple's gold and lapis lazuli imported from afar, while you toil for scraps of bread that barely dull the hunger's edge, your back a canvas of welts from the overseer's lash. A modern comparison emerges. It's like gig workers delivering for apps, hauling loads for invisible overlords who pocket the profits, your efforts fueling their luxury while you dodge traffic for tips, a cycle as ancient as these suns. Sarcasm simmers again. Divine sacrifice. Sure more like royal tax evasion wrapped in holy robes. With gods as the ultimate offshore account. As you stack another layer, the torchlight now mutated into the sun's glaring blaze reflected off whitewashed walls, blind you momentarily, casting harsh shadows that elongate your form into a grotesque parody of the gods themselves. A factual nod to how these structures, like the white temple atop its platform, served as earthly homes for deities requiring daily offerings of food and incense, lest they unleash drought or invasion on neglectful subjects. But the sensory struggle peaks. The scorching sun bakes your shoulders raw, turning sweat into rivulets that burn like acid in your wounds, and you battle dehydration's dizzy spell, visions swimming as if the ziggurat itself sways mockingly. In another poetic zoom-out, the Euphrates winds below like a silver serpent coiling around the city's base, its waters feeding the fields that sustain this madness, yet carrying away the sweat and blood of the forgotten. The shocking element erupts when a ritual procession ascends, priest dragging a bleating goat for sacrifice at the summit, its blood meant to appease Enlil's storms. But the sad dramatization hits as you recognize the animal's owner, a destitute farmer forced to give his last asset. Tears streaking his face as the blade falls, empathy surging for how gods demand not just bricks but lives, twisted into offerings that enrich the elite. You pause briefly, wiping brick dust from your eyes, sarcasm whispering heavenly insurance policy, paid in full with peasant premiums, no refunds on bad weather. The absurdity gleams in how they painted ziggurat steps in black, blue, and white to mimic the cosmos, a cosmic makeover using bitumen and glazed tiles that smelled of tar, stickier than spilled soda on a hot day. Historians ponder if these sacrifices were voluntary or coerced, debating whether fear of divine wrath or kingly decree drove the blade. But as you resume hauling, the spoils hoard glints from the temple, apex golden vessels and jeweled ornaments mocking your empty pockets, the injustice boiling like the sun overhead. Empathy for the sacrificed goat lingers, its fate a metaphor for your own expendability, much like disposable workers in factories churning out gadgets for distant consumers. The day's end approaches, the sun dipping lower to cast long, cooling shadows that offer fleeting relief. But the ziggurat stands unmoved, a strange visual image of stepped eternity etched against the reddening sky, its peak crowned with flickering lamps like stars fallen to earth, and a psychological chill settles what if these gods are just kings in disguise. Their demands a veil for mortal greed, leaving you to question if the true sacrifice is your unbroken spirit under this endless toil. Did you know that around 2334 BCE, when Sargon-of-Akkad forged the world's first true empire by conquering Sumerian cities with bronze weapons that could slice through flesh like butter, his armies reportedly washed their blades in the Persian Gulf after battles, but historians whisper that the real blood toll included entire populations deported or enslaved, turning victory parades into processions of ghosts haunting the victors with unspoken regrets. You clutch the bronze blade in your trembling hands, its cold edge biting into your palm like a lover's betrayal, drawing a thin line of blood that tastes sharply metallic on your tongue. The iron motif now mutated into the coppery bite of fresh-forged alloy mixed with the dust of trampled earth, as conquests swallow the ancient cities around you, the air thick with the choking haze of battlefield smoke that claws at your throat like invisible fingers, leaving you thirsty amid the parched plains where rivers once promised life but now run red with the fallout of ambition. The clang of metal on metal reverberates through your bones as you charge into the fray near Kish, your shield arm aching from the weight of leather-strapped wood that splinters under enemy blows, and the sun beats down like a hammer on an anvil, turning your sweat into rivers that soak the linen wraps evolving from wet wool's damp cling into blood-stained bandages hastily tied around gashes, chafing against raw skin in a sensory struggle that burns like fire ants marching across your flesh. Every clash forcing you to dodge arrows whistling past like vengeful spirits. It's ironic, isn't it, how you're part of Sargon's revolutionary army around 2334 BCE, unifying disparate city-states into an empire stretching from the Gulf to the Mediterranean, standardizing weights and measures for trade that flows like never before. Yet, It feels like joining a startup that promises world domination, but delivers endless crunch time and backstabbing colleagues. Worse than navigating office politics where the CEO plays God, a physical onslaught erupts as your unit storms the walls of Ummah, scaling ladders slick with the oil of fallen comrades, and you slip, tumbling into a ditch choked with dust and debris that fills your mouth with gritty filth. Coughing violently as betrayal strikes a supposed ally from Lagash hesitates, his eyes flickering with doubt, allowing an enemy spear to graze your side in the chaos, the shocking pain blooming like a dark flower, leaving you gasping on the ground with the sad weight of broken trust. Empathy surging for the conscripted farmers turned soldiers like you, their families back home starving while kings feast on conquered spoils, much like veterans today returning to forgotten wars with invisible scars. Historians still argue whether Sargon's humble origins as a cupbearer who rose to overthrow his king were legendary propaganda or gritty truth. Some claiming it inspired later tales like Moses in the Reeds, others seeing it as a blueprint for tyrannical ambition masked as destiny. A debate etched in the victory stele that glorify his 56-year reign. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the Mesopotamian landscape unfolds beneath you like a tattered tapestry, woven from river threads and bloodstains. Empires rising as fragile as sandcastles against the tide of time. And here's an absurd tidbit: warriors oiled their bodies with sesame extract not just for shine, but to make grappling harder in close combat, slipping like greased pigs in a ritual that smelled faintly of roasted nuts. A slippery tactic quirkier than modern wrestlers dousing themselves in baby oil for dramatic effect. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about a slick promotion, climbing the ranks on lubricated lies, better than greasing palms in corrupt deals, but with more literal fallout. But the sadness intensifies as you revisit the pinned worker from the ziggurat, now twisted in memory as a deserter executed for cowardice. His body left crucified on a stake as a warning, a surprising fall from builder to broken symbol of imperial ruthlessness. Empathy waning into horror at how quickly loyalty fractures under the weight of conquest. The torchlight mutated into bonfires of looted temples crackling on the horizon, casts flickering shadows that dance like accusatory wraiths across the dust-choked field, illuminating the injustice of it all. Semitic-speaking Akkadians like you impose their language on conquered Sumerians, erasing dialects in administrative decrees while hoarding the best lands, a cultural conquest as sharp as any blade. A modern comparison surfaces, it's like tech giants swallowing startups, rebranding everything in their image while the original creators get pink-slipped, your identity diluted in the merger's fine print. Sarcasm bubbles up again, unspoken betrayals. The Empire's secret sauce, spicier than office gossip and twice as lethal to morale. As you bind your wound with strips of captured cloth, the factual tide turns to how Sargon installs loyal governors, often family, to centralize power, creating a standing army of 5,400 that devours resources like a bottomless pit, sustaining campaigns that stretch your endurance to breaking. But the sensory struggle rages. Thirst parches your lips to cracking. The coppery blood tastes now mingled with dry dust that coats everything, turning each swallow into sandpaper agony. And you ration the last drops from a punctured water skin, battling delirium's haze where faces of fallen friends swim like ghosts. In another poetic zoom-out, the stars above wheel indifferently like celestial spectators, their patterns once omens now blurred by smoke, echoing the astronomy born from these very plains yet ignored in war's frenzy. The shocking element crashes as you witness a mass deportation, families from defeated Uruk herded like cattle, chains rattling in the dusk, their cries a sad chorus of uprooted lives, lightly dramatized in the way a child's toy drops forgotten in the dirt. Empathy overwhelming for these innocents whose homes become spoils, a human cost taller than any victory tally. You press forward with your unit, sarcasm whispering conquest's thirst quencher, bottomless and bitter, no chaser for the soul's hangover. The absurdity emerges in how they used inflated goat bladders as battlefield boys for crossing rivers, bobbing comically amid arrows, a floaty farce in the theatre of war. Historians ponder if these betrayals were calculated purges or spontaneous fractures in loyalty, debating whether Empire's glue was fear or genuine awe. But as you camp amid the ruins, blades still trembling in your grip, the unspoken rifts fester like untreated wounds. The injustice of victors writing history while losers' stories dissolve in dust. The bonfires dim to embers, casting elongated phantoms across the thirsty fields riddled with craters from chariot wheels, and a psychological chill creeps in. What if your own blade turns against you next? The Empire's hunger swallowing its children in endless cycles of betrayal. Did you know that during the Akkadian Empire's peak around 2250 BCE, under rulers like Naram-Sin who declared themselves gods, taxation decrees demanded up to a third of your harvest in grain and labour, enforced by scribes who could seize your home for non-payment. But whispers among ruins suggest rebellions simmered from overreach, turning loyal subjects into shadows plotting in the night. You hear the imperial decrees echoing in your ears like distant thunder rolling across the parched plains, their words carved into clay edicts that bind you tighter than iron shackles, the weight of taxation pressing on your chest as you kneel in the dusty marketplace of Akkad, counting out your meagre barley sacks under the watchful eyes of a governor's enforcer, whose breath reeks of spiced wine while yours carries the mutated iron tang now infused with the sour bite of fermented debt, like biting down on a coin forged from your own stolen sweat, the air heavy with the clamour of merchants haggling and the distant lowing of confiscated livestock. The sun dips low, casting long shadows that creep like nomadic raiders from the Zagros Mountains, their forms hungry for the fragile peace you've scraped together after Sargon's conquests. And you feel the chains, literal links of bronze around the wrists of debtors like your neighbour, clinking with each forced step toward the palace granaries, a sensory struggle that tugs at your own unbound but burdened limbs, the metal's cold seeping into your imagination like frostbite in the desert heat, evolving the wet wool motif into sweat-dampened hemp ropes coiled around tax bundles, chafing your shoulders raw as you haul them under threat of seizure. It's ironic, isn't it, how these decrees promise protection through unity around 2300 BCE, when the Empire standardizes measures to facilitate trade across vast territories, yet it feels like filing your taxes online today, where algorithms audit your every penny while the system glitches in favor of the elite, worse than waiting for a refund that never comes because some bureaucrat hit delete. A physical unraveling hits as nomadic Gutian scouts breach the outskirts, their arrows thunking into the city gates during a surprise raid, forcing you to grab a makeshift spear and rush to the walls, your heart pounding as dust kicks up in choking clouds that fill your lungs like inhaled regret, scraping your throat dry amid the chaos where betrayal blooms a guard you trusted flees, leaving a gap that lets shadows pour in, the shocking intrusion scattering families into the night with screams that pierce like daggers, leaving you to fend off a raider whose wild eyes mirror your own desperation, the sad aftermath a looted home with your child's toy crushed underfoot, empathy welling for the displaced who wander like ghosts, much like refugees today fleeing borders only to find new chains of bureaucracy waiting. Historians still argue whether the Empire's taxation fueled innovation in irrigation canals that boosted yields, or sowed the seeds of its downfall by breeding resentment among overtaxed provinces, some pointing to inscriptions boasting of suppressed revolts as evidence of systemic fragility, a debate that echoes in the eroded stele unearthed from imperial ruins. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the twin rivers snake through the land like veins pulsing with borrowed life, empires swelling and deflating on their banks while nomadic winds whisper eternal unrest. And here's an absurd tidbit: tax collectors use knotted strings as primitive abacuses to tally debts, dangling like nooses from their belts. A tangled accounting method quirkier than balancing your checkbook with rubber bands and hope, far more prone to accidental knots that inflated your dues. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself imperial math, where 2 + 2 equals whatever the king needs, slicker than a politician's budget fudge but with sharper consequences. But the sadness deepens as you revisit Sargon from the battlefields, now twisted in legend as a divine founder whose grandson Naram-Sin elevates himself to godhood, a surprising hubris that alienates priests and sparks divine omens of doom. Empathy shifting to pity for the man whose ambition blinded him to the creeping shadows, turning his legacy into a cautionary tale of overreach. The torchlight mutated into flickering watchfires along the walls that cast jittery phantoms on approaching dunes, illuminates the injustice of it all. Nomadic Gutians, described as mountain dragons knowing no inhibitions, raid for the surpluses your taxes built, while kings like Rimush crush internal rebellions with ruthless deportations, hoarding peace for palaces as you huddle in fear. A modern comparison creeps in. It's like corporate mergers swallowing small towns, taxing locals dry for shareholder gains while outsiders poach the remnants. Your community frayed like outdated infrastructure ignored until it collapses. Sarcasm simmers again, fragile peace. The Empire's premium product guaranteed to shatter under pressure. No warranty against nomadic fine print. As you barricade your door with tax-empty crates, the factual undercurrent reveals how these decrees, written in Akkadian script on clay, centralized power but strained resources, funding a standing army that patrolled trade routes from the Indus to Anatolia, yet left borders porous to highland incursions around 2200 BCE. But the century struggle escalates. The thunderous echoes of decrees now blend with actual storms brewing, rain pelting like accusatory stones that turn dust to mud sucking at your feet. The hemp ropes evolving into sodden burdens that weigh heavier, chafing deeper into your resolve as you ration dwindling supplies amid raid alerts. In another poetic zoom-out, the stars pierce the storm clouds like indifferent lances, their constellations once mapped for harvests now twisted into portents of invasion, echoing the astronomy that fails to predict human folly. The shocking element surges when a decree arrives, demanding more labor for frontier forts, conscripting your brother who vanishes into the mountains, his fate unknown in the nomadic haze, a sad dramatization of families torn by imperial greed, lightly etched in the tear-streaked faces around you, empathy overwhelming for the lost whose shadows join the creeping threats. You fortify your home with what remains, sarcasm, whispering taxation with representation, more like extraction without exception, the king's thunder drowning out your pleas. The absurdity shines in how they marked tax-paid goods, with royal seals shaped like cylinders rolled in clay, imprinting lions or eagles as stamps of approval, a rolling signature quirkier than emoji approvals on digital receipts. Historians ponder if these nomadic pressures accelerated the empire's ecological strain from over-irrigation, debating whether salinization or invasions dealt the fatal blow. But as you peer into the darkening horizon, the shadows inch closer, their hunger palpable like your own suppressed rage. The injustice festering as peace frays thread by thread. The watchfires sputter in the wind, casting elongated wraiths that merge with approaching figures, and a psychological chill grips you. What if these decrees aren't binding chains but unraveling threads, pulling your world apart as the thunder grows louder, promising not rain, but ruin? Did you know that in the opulent temples of Sumer around 2500 BCE, golden idols of gods like Enlil were anointed daily with oils worth more than a farmer's yearly harvest? But priests often demanded voluntary human sacrifices, sometimes retainers buried alive with kings to appease cosmic whims, leaving families to wonder if their loved ones were chosen by divine lottery or priestly convenience. You kneel before the golden idols that gleam mockingly in the temple flames, their polished surfaces reflecting your distorted face like a funhouse mirror warped by heat. The incense smoke billowing thick and cloying, burning your skin with acrid tendrils that sting like invisible nettles, seeping into your pores and evolving the iron tang on your tongue into a smoky bitterness laced with myrrh and cedar, as if you're tasting the charred remnants of forgotten prayers, the air heavy with the ritual chants of priests who twist fate with their incantations, forcing you to press your forehead to the cool stone floor in submission to these unyielding cosmic whims that dictate floods, harvests, and your very survival. The flames crackle hungrily in bronze braziers, casting shadows that writhe on the ziggurat walls like serpents coiling around your resolve, and you feel the priest's hands on your shoulders, guiding you deeper into prostration, their touch cold despite the sweltering enclosure, a sensory struggle that crawls up your spine like ice melting into fire, the wet wool motif mutating into ritual linens draped over your back, heavy with sacred oils that cling and chafe, turning devotion into a slick, uncomfortable prison of fabric and faith. It's ironic, isn't it, how you're immersed in this pantheon worship during the early dynastic period, where deities like Inanna embody love and war in one volatile package, promising fertility but delivering battlefield carnage, much like swiping right on a dating app expecting romance only to get ghosted after a messy argument. Worse than modern therapy sessions where you pay to unpack cosmic daddy issues. A physical rite unfolds as the high priest anoints the idol of Anu, the sky god, with a golden ladle. But the oil spills, sizzling on the hot stones and splattering your arms with burning droplets that blister instantly, forcing you to bite back a cry as the pain radiates like lightning. The shocking burn a sad echo of how these rituals consume the faithful, empathy surging for the temple attendants, often orphans or debtors like you, whose lives are fodder for divine appeasement, much like interns today grinding through unpaid gigs for a shot at illusory success. Historians still argue whether these cosmic whims were genuine theological constructs or clever priestly inventions to consolidate power. Some citing hymns praising Enki's wisdom as evidence of sophisticated mythology. Others viewing the pantheon's human-like jealousies as projections of royal court drama, a debate preserved in clay tablets that detail offerings to prevent divine tantrums. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the temple's vaulted ceiling arches overhead like the dome of heaven itself, stars painted in lapis lazuli twinkling falsely amid the smoke, a microcosm where mortal knees bend to immortal caprice. And here's an absurd tidbit: priests used date palm spatulas to feed idol symbolic meals, scraping eaten portions into bowls for redistribution. A divine dine and dash ritual, quirkier than leaving a tip for a ghost server at a haunted restaurant. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about holy leftovers, recycling godly scraps for the masses, better than fast food value meals but with eternal salvation as the side order. But the sadness thickens as you revisit Naram Sin from the imperial echoes, now twisted in temple lore as a deified king whose horned crown symbolized godhood, a surprising blasphemy that alienated the very priests who once crowned him, empathy shifting to quiet pity for his fall from grace, hubris unraveling like incense threads in the wind. The torchlight mutated into sacred flames leaping higher with added resins that pop and spark cast grotesque silhouettes on the golden idols, illuminating the injustice of it all while you kneel in rags, offering your last copper shekel to avert famine. The priests hoard temple estates vast as small kingdoms, twisting omens to justify their wealth, a cosmic scam where the gods always win the pot. A modern comparison whispers in it's like prosperity gospel preachers jetting private while congregations tithe their savings. Your faith taxed heavier than any IRS audit, with salvation dangling just out of reach. Sarcasm curls your lips again, unyielding whims. The ultimate plot twist gods playing favourites like biased referees in a rigged game. No instant replay for the losers. As you rise unsteadily, the factual weave reveals how these rituals, documented in the Epic of Gilgamesh's precursors, blend mythology with astronomy. Priests tracking stars from ziggurat tops to predict eclipses as divine displeasure. Around 2400 BCE, when hymns to Inanna eroticize power in ways that bind worshippers tighter. But the sensory struggle flares. The incense clogs your lungs, turning each breath into a wheezing effort that burns like inhaled embers. The oiled linens evolving into a sticky second skin that pulls at your burns, amplifying the devotion's toll as you battle nausea from the overwhelming sense. In another poetic zoom-out, the cosmos beyond the temple walls wheels eternally, planets as pawns in a divine chess game where mortals are mere checkers, sacrificed without remorse. The shocking element descends when a priest declares an ill omen a comet streaking like a fiery arrow and demands a volunteer for ritual purification, his gaze landing on a young acolyte whose wide eyes mirror your fear, the sad dramatization unfolding as she's led to the altar for symbolic scourging. Her whimpers a light echo of the human cost behind golden facades, empathy overwhelming for her innocence twisted into cosmic collateral. You avert your eyes, sarcasm whispering fate's twisted sense of humor, funnier than a bad fortune cookie but with sharper edges. The absurdity gleams in how they consulted sheep livers for divination, poking the organs for blemishes that revealed godly will, a gutsy prophecy method messier than reading tea leaves after a spill. Historians ponder if these whims were personifications of natural forces or social controls, debating whether fear of underworld gloom motivated ethics or just compliance. But as you exit the smoke-filled chamber, the idol's gleam fades behind you, their mocking eyes lingering in your mind, the injustice simmering as priests feast on offerings while you hunger for meaning beyond the burn. The temple flames sputter in the draft from opening doors, casting elongated phantoms that merge with night shadows outside, and a psychological chill envelops you. What if these cosmic whims are just echoes of human cruelty, gilded in gold to hide the rot, leaving you to question if kneeling brings salvation or merely deeper scars. Did you know that by 2100 BCE, in the over-irrigated fields of southern Mesopotamia, salinization turned once fertile soils into white-crusted wastelands where crop yields plummeted by up to 65%, forcing desperate farmers to abandon lands their ancestors had tamed? But ancient texts blame it on divine curses, while modern experts point to human carelessness, in a debate that still rages over whether it was godly wrath or just bad plumbing. You feel the floodwaters rising around your ankles, salty and bitter like tears mixed with brine, seeping into your sandals and turning the earth beneath into a treacherous slurry that sucks at your feet with each sloshing step, the acrid taste invading your mouth as splashes hit your lips, evolving the iron tang on your tongue into a corrosive salinity that burns like regret swallowed whole, the air heavy with the fetid stench of rotting vegetation from drowned fields, where barley stalks wilt and blacken under the relentless onslaught. The waters creep higher, chilling your calves with a numbing cold that contrasts the oppressive heat beating down from a merciless sun. And you wade through the inundated plots, your hands grasping at sodden sheaves that crumble to mush between your fingers. A sensory struggle that crawls up your legs like icy vines constricting your movement. The wet wool motif mutating into waterlogged tunics plastered to your skin, heavy and clammy, chafing with every desperate lunge to salvage what remains of the harvest, turning your body into a vessel of sodden misery amid this cycle of famine that devours dreams as voraciously as it does crops. It's ironic, isn't it? How you're caught in the Neo-Sumerian era's agricultural boom turned bust around 2000 BCE, when our three kings like Shulgi expanded irrigation networks to feed growing cities, promising abundance through canals that webbed the land like veins, yet it feels like subscribing to a premium streaming service for endless content only to get buffering errors and content droughts. Worse than ordering takeout during a storm and watching it arrive soggy and cold. A physical deluge overwhelms as the levee breaches nearby, unleashing a torrent that sweeps you off balance, forcing you to claw at a crumbling embankment while waves pummel your chest, gasping for air as mud fills your nostrils and eyes, the shocking force dragging a neighbour under in a swirl of debris, his flailing arms vanishing beneath the froth with a final, gurgling cry, the sad spectacle leaving you clinging to roots, empathy flooding in for his family who'll face starvation without him. Much like communities today ravaged by climate disasters, where one storm wipes out livelihoods built over generations, historians still argue whether this relentless famine stemmed from divine curses as lamented in texts like the Curse of Agade, blaming Naram-Sin's hubris for angering the gods, or sheer carelessness in over-irrigation that leached salts into the soil, a debate pitting supernatural explanations against ecological evidence from core samples showing rising salinity levels that choked plant roots. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the alluvial plain transforms into a vast, weeping mirror reflecting fractured skies, rivers swollen like arteries bursting from the heart's overexertion, where human ingenuity drowns in its own excess. And here's an absurd tidbit: desperate farmers mixed urine with water to dilute salty soils, believing it restored fertility through some alchemical magic. A pungent remedy stinkier than DIY hacks gone wrong on TikTok, where you pour vinegar on everything hoping for a miracle cure. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about pissing away your future, a golden shower of false hope that leaves everything more tainted. Better than modern fad diets, but with earthier side effects. But the sadness swells as you revisit the high priest from the temple flames, now twisted in your vision as a famine oracle who hoards grain in sacred silos while preaching cosmic balance. A surprising hypocrisy where the divine intermediary starves the faithful to fatten his own stores. Empathy curdling into bitterness for how faith's guardians exploit the cycle, turning prayers into pleas for scraps. The torchlight mutated into distant village bonfires flickering through the haze of rising mist, casts wavering reflections on the floodwaters, illuminating the injustice of it all, while kings like Ur-Nammu codify laws promising equity. The salinized fields favor the elite with upstream access, leaving downstream peasants like you to wither. A stratified drought where water flows uphill to power. A modern comparison surfaces it's like water rights battles in the American West, where corporations siphon rivers dry for profit while small farms parch. Your dreams drowned in legal loopholes as ancient as these canals. Sarcasm drips like the brackish overflow relentless cycle. Nature's subscription service renewed annually with famine fees. No opt-out for the poor. As you drag yourself to higher ground, the factual undercurrent reveals how this environmental collapse around 2000 BCE weakened the Ur-3 dynasty. Grain prices inflating tenfold as recorded on tablets, sparking migrations and invasions that eroded central control. A slow starvation of empire itself. But the sensory struggle surges. The bitter salt crusts your lips to cracking. Each breath a rasp through waterlogged lungs. The clammy tunics evolving into mildewed shrouds that weigh you down like accumulated sins, amplifying the famine's grip as you forage for withered roots that offer scant nourishment, battling vertigo from hunger's hollow gnaw. In another poetic zoom-out, the stars emerge through parting clouds like indifferent jewels scattered on velvet, their ancient patterns mocking the failed calendars that once predicted plenty, but now herald only want. The shocking element crashes as a child, skeletal from malnutrition, collapses in the shallows, a tiny frame floating briefly before sinking, the sad dramatization, a light brushstroke of loss that pierces your core. Empathy, overwhelming for the innocents claimed by this curse of plenty turned poison, their futures dissolved in the salty tide. You pull her free, too late. Sarcasm, whispering carelessness, or curse. Either way. The gods laugh last, their whims as fickle as weather apps that promise sun but deliver deluge. The absurdity bubbles up in how they diverted rivers with palm-log dams, makeshift barriers that burst like overinflated egos, a woody engineering fail more comical than building sandcastles against the tide. Historians ponder if this salinization was inevitable over-irrigation or avoidable with crop rotation, debating whether foresight could have saved the heartland or if hubris blinded the engineers. But as you bury the child in shallow mud, the injustice festers like an open wound, the elite feasting in distant palaces while your world dissolves grain by grain. The bonfires dim across the flooded expanse, casting elongated spectres that waver on the water's surface like drowned hopes reaching for air, and a psychological chill seizes you. What if this famine isn't just a cycle but a harbinger, the land's revenge for human overreach, leaving you to wonder if dreams can ever resurface from such bitter depths? Did you know that around 1792 BCE, when Hammurabi ascended Babylon's throne and hammered out 282 laws on a towering diorite stele taller than a man, these edicts promised justice for all but carved penalties that varied by social class and eye for an eye only if equals clashed. Otherwise the poor paid fines they couldn't afford, turning legal fairness into a stacked deck where over 200 surviving copies reveal a system that protected widows yet enslaved debtors for life. You watch the chisel hammer into the unyielding stone before your eyes, each strike sending sparks and chips flying like accusations, the metallic clang reverberating through your skull and leaving a resonant ache that pulses in time with your heartbeat. The air in the Babylonian workshop thick with the dust of ground rock that coats your throat, evolving the iron tang on your tongue into a gritty sharpness laced with the mineral bite of diorite, as if you're swallowing the weight of codified inequality itself. The promises of justice etched deep but delivering uneven scales that tip heavily against the likes of you, a commoner whose calloused hands tremble from the day's labour. The stele looms like a judgmental sentinel, its surface gleaming under the flickering lamps, and you feel compelled to trace the emerging cuneiform lines with your fingertip, the rough grooves snagging your skin and drawing a thin line of blood that stings with salty fire. A sensory struggle that crawls across your palm like invisible thorns, perpetuating the sting of disparity. The wet wool motif mutating into sweat-dampened palm fronds, wrapped around your hands for meagre protection against the chisel's debris, clinging and chafing as you assist the artisan under royal decree, turning what should be empowerment into a thorny reminder of your place at society's bottom. It's ironic, isn't it? How you're witnessing the birth of Hammurabi's code around 1750 BCE. A legal masterpiece that covers everything from inheritance to surgical fees, standardizing justice across a unified Mesopotamia for the first time since Sargon. Yet it feels like downloading a terms of service update that sounds equitable, but buries clauses favoring the elite. Worse than scrolling through app permissions that track your every move while claiming to protect your privacy. A physical inscription intensifies as the hammer slips slightly, grazing your knuckle with bruising force that sends a jolt up your arm, forcing you to stifle a gasp amid the workshop's din. The shocking mishap a sad metaphor for how these laws, while protecting the weak from the strong in theory, often crush the vulnerable under uneven application, like the clause demanding a builder's house collapse on him if his shoddy work kills a homeowner's son, yet allowing monetary compensation if the victim is a slave. Empathy surging for the enslaved whose lives are quantified in silver shekels, much like undervalued workers today in gig economies where accidents yield paltry settlements. Historians still argue whether Hammurabi's stele was a genuine reform for societal welfare or mere propaganda to legitimize his conquests, some citing its prologue invoking gods like Shamash for divine endorsement as evidence of enlightened rule. Others viewing the class-based penalties as proof of entrenched aristocracy, a debate fueled by the stele's discovery in 1901 at Susa, far from Babylon, suggesting it was looted as a trophy. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the Euphrates beyond the city murmurs like impartial judge, its currents carrying silt that builds and erodes empires alike, indifferent to the scales humans tip in vain pursuit of balance. And here's an absurd tidbit: surgeons under the code faced hand amputation if a patient died during an operation. But only for freeborn clients. Slaves got cheaper fixes with bronze knives boiled in beer for sterilization. A boozy antiseptic method quirkier than using whiskey to clean wounds in old westerns. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself. Talk about cutting costs. A literal handoff for malpractice. Sharper than modern lawsuits, but with less paperwork and more permanent regrets. But the sadness deepens as you revisit the high priest from the temple rites, now twisted in your perception as a legal advisor interpreting the code to favor temple estates in property disputes. A surprising corruption where spiritual authority bends earthly justice, empathy curdling into disillusionment for how even holy men game the system, leaving widows to beg for the protections Hammurabi proclaimed but rarely enforced. The torchlight mutated into oil lamps swinging from chains that cast swaying shadows on the stele. Making the laws dance like mocking spectres illuminates the injustice of it all. Aristocrats pay fines for assaults that would maim commoners in retaliation, perpetuating a thorn of inequality that pricks deeper for the poor, whose debts lead to bondage while the wealthy negotiate escapes. A modern comparison pricks your mind. It's like tax codes riddled with loopholes for billionaires, where you pay full freight on meager wages while they deduct yachts as business expenses. Your sting as perpetual as credit card interest that never forgives. Sarcasm coils around your thoughts again, promising justice. The ultimate bait and switch advertised as equal scales but delivered with a wink to the privileged. No returns accepted. As you polish the stele's base, the factual narrative unfolds how Hammurabi, ruling 43 years, used these laws to consolidate power after military campaigns that subdued rivals like Larsa and Mari, inscribing them publicly so all knew the rules. Yet enforcement varied by whim, fostering a fragile order amid growing urban sprawl in Babylon, home to 60,000 souls by his death. But the sensory struggle thorns deeper, the stone dust irritates your eyes to tearing, each blink a gritty torment, the palm fronds evolving into thorny bindings that snag and tear at your flesh, amplifying the code's prickly fairness as you battle the urge to rebel against this carved hypocrisy. In another poetic zoom-out, the city sprawls like a vast, uneven scale balanced on riverbanks, its palaces tipping high while hovels sink low, a microcosm of cosmic imbalance where gods weigh souls but mortals rig the measure. The shocking element engraves itself when a debtor is dragged in, his family wailing as the code sentences him to slavery for unpaid loans. The sad dramatization, a light sketch of shattered lives under legal veneer. Empathy overwhelming for his children left destitute, their futures indentured by ink and chisel. You avert your gaze, sarcasm whispering uneven scales. Justice's favourite illusion tilted just enough to keep the poor perpetually pricked, like acupuncture for societal ills that never heals. The absurdity carves in with how they tested the code's adultery laws via river ordeals, dunking suspects to see if the Euphrates judged them innocent by letting them float. A watery trial by error wetter than reality TV dunk tanks, but with deadlier stakes. Historians ponder if this class disparity fostered stability or sowed rebellion seeds, debating whether the code's protections for orphans curbed exploitation or merely masked systemic thorns. But as you step back from the finished stele, its laws glaring in the lamplight. The injustice festers like an untended wound. The elite's promises ringing hollow amid the workshop's echoes. The swinging lamps dim as evening falls, casting elongated distortions on the stone that warp the inscriptions into grotesque parodies of fairness, and a psychological chill thorns your core. What if these hammered laws aren't shields but shackles? Their uneven edges cutting deeper with every generation, leaving you to wonder if justice's sting ever dulls or merely mutates into new forms of perpetual pain. Did you know that around 2000 BCE, Mesopotamian merchants traversed caravan routes stretching over 2,000 miles to the Indus Valley, trading wool textiles for lapis lazuli that kings coveted for their crowns? But records show up to half these expeditions vanish to bandits or sandstorms, leaving behind bleached bones and unspoken tales of greed that devoured fortunes faster than any royal feast. You feel the distant caravans kicking up dust that billows like a choking fog, irritating your throat with fine particles that scratch and settle, turning each cough into a raspy ordeal where the iron tang on your tongue mutates into a sandy grit, laced with the exotic spice of foreign sands, as if you're inhaling the remnants of shattered dreams carried on the wind, the air shimmering with heat waves that distort the horizon, where camel bells jingle faintly, mocking your parched lips that crack and bleed under the relentless sun. The caravan trail stretches endlessly before you, your feet sinking into the shifting dunes that burn through your worn sandals, and you grip the reins of a stubborn donkey, laden with bundles of textiles, its coarse hair pricking your palms like persistent regrets, a sensory struggle that crawls down your arms as blisters form and pop, the wet wool motif evolving into dust-caked shawls draped over your shoulders for meagre shade, clinging with gritty persistence that chafes your neck raw, turning every sway of the beast into a jolting reminder of the luxuries you're transporting, ivory combs and copper ingots destined for palaces you could never enter, affordances far beyond your merchant's meagre cut. It's ironic, isn't it, how you're part of the old Babylonian trade networks exploding under Hammurabi's unified realm, where standardized weights ensure fair deals from the Persian Gulf to Anatolia, fostering an economy that links distant worlds. Yet it feels like dropshipping on Amazon today, where you hustle goods for invisible overlords who skim the profits, worse than watching your package tracking stall in transit limbo, while the seller ghosts your complaints. A physical ambush erupts as bandits crest a nearby ridge, their silhouettes blurring in the dust storm that whips sand into your eyes like needles, forcing you to dive behind your donkey as arrows whistle past, one grazing your arm with a searing slice that draws blood tasting of defeat and dirt, the shocking raid scattering your fellow traders in panic, packs bursting open to spill precious tin ores that roll away like lost opportunities, the sad chaos claiming a young apprentice who falls with an arrow in his chest, his gurgling last breath a light dramatization of ambition's cost, empathy surging for his widowed mother back in Babylon, who'll receive only tales of his end. Much like families today mourning gig workers lost to delivery route dangers for corporate convenience, historians still argue whether these trade empires crumbled from internal greedy overextension, like the escalating costs of maintaining far-flung routes that drained treasuries, or external pressures from nomadic incursions that disrupted caravans, a debate sparked by clay tablets detailing inflated prices for imports during Hammurabi's later years, suggesting economic strain beneath the legal facade. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the desert expanse unfurls like a vast, thirsty parchment scrawled with invisible roots of fortune and folly, dunes rising and falling in waves that mimic the empire's ebb and flow, indifferent to the ants crawling their crests. And here's an absurd tidbit. Merchants sealed deals with cylinder seals rolled in clay, imprinting mythical beasts as signatures. But in dire straits, they use scorpion shells as emergency weights for bartering, a prickly substitute that could sting if mishandled, quirkier than haggling at a flea market with pocket lint as collateral. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about sealing the deal with a sting, a venomous handshake sharper than Black Friday crowds, but with deadlier barbs if trust snaps. But the sadness intensifies as you revisit Hammurabi from the steely workshop, now twisted in your merchant's lore as a distant lawgiver whose code regulated trade tariffs yet failed to curb royal monopolies on luxuries like carnelian beads. A surprising avarice where the king's justice enriched his coffers, while caravans like yours bled dry from tolls. empathy shifting to weary resignation for how even reformers hoard the Reach's fruits, leaving middlemen like you to scrape the crumbs. The torchlight mutated into caravan lanterns swaying on poles that cast bobbing shadows across the dunes. Turning the dust into a hazy veil of phantoms illuminates the injustice of it all. You trade luxuries you can't afford, silks that whisper of opulence while your family back home mends rags, empires crumbling under greedy reach as provincial governors siphon shares, fattening themselves on your risks. A modern comparison dusts your thoughts. It's like influencer sponsorships where you peddle products you'll never own. You'll feed a caravan of ads that enrich platforms while you chase elusive payouts, the weight of it all pressing heavier than any overloaded camel. Sarcasm swirls like the sand-greedy reach, the Empire's yoga pose stretching too far until something snaps. No zen in the fallout, as you regroup after the raid, binding your wound with strips of torn shawl that sting with embedded grit. The factual underlay reveals how these caravans, peaking in the 18th century BCE, connected Mesopotamia to the Indus for tin essential in bronze making, fueling military might but straining resources as overland hauls inflated costs. Empires like Babylon's expanding trade pacts yet vulnerable to disruptions that heralded decline, but the sensory struggle dusts deeper. The irritating throat evolves into a persistent hack that rattles your chest, each breath a sandy invasion, the caked shawls mutating into abrasive cloaks that scour your skin raw, amplifying the luxury's taunt as you salvage scattered goods, battling exhaustion's haze where visions of palace feasts mock your empty stomach. In another poetic zoom-out, the stars overhead cluster like unreachable gems traded in distant markets, their constellations charting paths that empires follow blindly, only to lose their way in the sands of over-ambition. The shocking element scatters like the spilled oars when a surviving trader confesses skimming profits to bribe officials, his betrayal fracturing the caravan's fragile trust, the sad unraveling a light sketch of how greed's weight crushes from within, empathy overwhelming for the group now splintered, futures bartered away like cheap trinkets. You press on alone with what remains. Sarcasm, whispering trading luxuries, the ultimate fool's gold, shiny promises that crumble to dust in your grasp. Dustier than forgotten eBay listings. The absurdity caravans in with how they navigated using ostrich eggshells as water canteens, hollowed and plugged with wax. A eggy lifeline bouncier than modern hydration packs, but prone to cracking under pressure. Historians ponder if this greedy overreach accelerated Babylon's contraction after Hammurabi, debating whether trade's boom masked underlying fractures or actively widened them through unequal wealth distribution. But as you trudge toward the next oasis, the dust settling in your wake like a shroud, the injustice festers like an untreated blister, empires reach grasping at horizons while crushing those who carry the load. The lantern lights sway dimly ahead, casting elongated mirages on the dunes that twist into spectral merchants beckoning with empty hands. And a psychological chill dusts your soul. What if this greedy pursuit isn't expansion, but erosion? The luxuries allure a mirage that leads only to crumbling foundations, leaving you to question if any reach can hold without breaking the backs that sustain it. Did you know that around 1350 BCE, Assyrian iron chariots revolutionized warfare by thundering across battlefields at speeds up to 30 miles per hour, their spiked wheels churning enemies into the dust? But inscriptions boast of kings like Ashurbanipal who collected tribute in severed heads, a grisly tally that historians estimate numbered in the thousands, turning conquest into a bureaucratic nightmare of retribution that haunted even the victors with nightmares of uprising. You feel the iron chariots rumbling beneath you, the wooden frame vibrating through your bones like a ceaseless earthquake that jars every joint and rattles your teeth, the metallic clatter echoing in your skull and evolving the iron tang on your tongue into a vibrating sharpness, laced with the oily grit of axle grease, as if you're biting down on a live wire forged from ancient forges. The dust from conquered lands billowing up in choking clouds that sting your eyes and coat your lungs. Whispering rebellions from the parched earth where subjugated peoples plot in shadowed whispers, chilling your nights with fears of retribution that slither into your dreams like cold serpents coiling around your throat. The chariot lurches over uneven roads carved through Syrian hills, your hands gripping the rail until knuckles whiten and split from the friction. blood welling up to mix with sweat in a sticky mess that drips onto the floorboards. A sensory struggle that crawls through your palms like fire spreading from embers. The wet wool motif mutating into leather harness straps slick with horse sweat that chafe your thighs raw with each bounce. Turning what should be triumphant rides into endurance tests, where every rut feels like a personal vendetta from the lands you've trampled. It's ironic, isn't it, how you're rolling in the vanguard of the Middle Assyrian Empire under rulers like Adad-Nirari. Around 1300 BCE, when iron weapons and chariotry tactics forge a military machine that extends from the Tigris to the Mediterranean, standardizing terror as policy to quell resistance. Yet it feels like driving a monster truck in a demolition derby today, exhilarating until the crashes pile up and the repair bills in lives and loyalty bankrupt the thrill. Worse than road rage on a jammed freeway where one wrong merge sparks chaos. A physical tumult erupts as your chariot hits a hidden ditch in conquered Mitanni territory, the axle splintering with a crack like thunder, hurling you forward into the dirt where rocks bite into your knees and elbows, gasping as dust fills your mouth and nostrils in a suffocating rush. The shocking flip leaving your driver pinned under the wreckage with a leg twisted unnaturally. His moans a sad symphony of broken ambition, empathy surging for him, a conscript from distant farms who dreamed of glory but found only the retribution of gravity and poor scouting. Much like delivery drivers today, crashing in rush-hour pursuits for on-time bonuses that barely cover medical bills. Historians still argue whether Assyria's chariot innovations were born from native ingenuity or borrowed from Hittite foes, some citing reliefs of charging vehicles as proof of homegrown evolution, others pointing to captured tech in campaigns as evidence of adaptive theft. A debate that underscores how empires built on borrowed wheels often spun out of control. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the rolling plains of northern Mesopotamia unfurl like a vast scarred hide stretched taut under chariot tracks, rivers threading through like veins pulsing with the blood of subjugated flows, where conquest's rumble echoes eternally in the wind's howl. And here's an absurd tidbit: chariot drivers smeared their faces with onion paste to ward off evil spirits believed to cause accidents, a teary-eyed superstition that blurred vision more than it banished demons, quirkier than rubbing garlic on your steering wheel to repel road trolls in a fantasy RPG. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about crying over spilt victories, a pungent ward against fate's twists sharper than onion breath after a bad date, but with horses bolting from the smell. But the sadness deepens as you revisit Sargon from the early conquests, now twisted in Assyrian annals as a legendary predecessor whose empire's ghost inspires kings like Shalmaneser Amp to raise rebel cities. A surprising resurrection, where his unification tactics mutate into tools for terror, empathy fading into dread for how heroes of old become blueprints for brutality, their legacies weaponized to justify the wheel's ruthless turn. The torchlight mutated into chariot-mounted braziers that flicker wildly with the motion, casting jittery shadows on the road that dance like fleeing spectres, illuminates the injustice of it all. Conquered lands like those of the Hurrians whisper rebellions through informants who betray kin for Assyrian silver, while you, a lowly charioteer, bear the fears of retribution in sleepless nights haunted by visions of uprising daggers. The elite safe in Nineveh palaces hoarding the spoils of your risks. A modern comparison rumbles in. It's like cybersecurity firms hacking rivals for data, while you, the field agent, dodge digital landmines. Your nights chilled by paranoia of blowback, the corporate chariot racing ahead on your broken back. Sarcasm revs up again, fears of retribution. The Empire's nightlight keeps you awake better than coffee. No decaf option for the conquered. As you right the chariot with strained muscles, patching the axle with scavenged wood that splinters into your hands, the factual grind reveals how these iron beasts, emerging in the 14th century BCE under Ashur-uballit, propelled Assyria from city-state to regional power, their speed enabling rapid strikes that subdued Mitanni and extracted tribute in timber and horses, sustaining the war machine amid growing provincial unrest. But the sensory struggle jars harder. The rumbling vibrations evolve into a bone-deep ache that nauseates with each mile. The leather straps turning into abrasive bonds that blister your skin, amplifying the rebellion's whisper as you camp under watchful guards, battling insomnia where every rustle signals uprising. In another poetic zoom-out, the starry vault wheels above like a celestial chariot course, constellations charting paths of glory that veer into abyssal drops, where mortal hubs spin wildly toward inevitable crash. The shocking element thunders when a scout reports a rebellion brewing in Hanagalbat, former allies turning spears inward after years of tribute drains, the sad unraveling a light portrayal of loyalty frayed by overtaxation, empathy overwhelming for the rebels whose whispers carry the weight of your own suppressed grievances, their nights as chilled as yours by the Empire's shadow. You tighten your grip on the reins, sarcasm whispering conquered lands, the ultimate echo chamber, whisper one grievance, and it rumbles back as revolution, louder than any chariot's roar. The absurdity wheels in with how charioteers trained blindfolded to navigate by sound, ears tuned to wheel creaks over enemy shouts, a sensory deprivation drill dizzier than virtual reality simulations gone glitchy. Historians ponder if this chariot dominance fostered Assyrian resilience through the Bronze Age collapse, or sowed seeds of overextension that invited later falls, debating whether tactical brilliance masked strategic short-sightedness. But as you urge the horses onward into the darkening plains, the injustice vibrates through you like the road's endless jars, rebellion's whispers growing to a chorus that chills deeper than desert nights. The braziers sputter in the wind, casting elongated distortions on the rutted path that twist into spectral warriors rising from the dust, and a psychological chill grips your core. What if these fears of retribution aren't paranoia, but prophecy? The conquered land's whispers building to a roar that could unseat even the mightiest chariot, leaving you to wonder if the rumble beneath is conquest's triumph or its undoing. Did you know that in the Grand Library of Nineveh around 650 BCE, King Ashurbanipal amassed over 30,000 clay tablets, inscribed with everything from epic tales to medical recipes? But flames from ritual lamps often singed the edges during late-night copying sessions, destroying irreplaceable knowledge in puffs of smoke, while astronomers etched omens predicting Empire's doom events that eerily came true when the city burned in 612 BCE, leaving historians to puzzle if it was prophetic foresight or self-fulfilling paranoia. You feel the library flames flickering on ancient scrolls, their heat licking at your fingertips like curious tongues of fire that singe the skin with a sharp, stinging bite, drawing tiny blisters that pop and ooze, the acrid smoke curling into your nostrils and evolving the iron tang on your tongue into a charred bitterness laced with the ashy residue of burning reed ink, as if you're tasting the dissolution of centuries-old wisdom crumbling to dust in your grasp. The vast halls of Nineveh's royal archive enveloping you in a haze of flickering light, where shadows play tricks on the stacked shelves, whispering of knowledge slipping away like sand through cracked hourglasses. The scrolls papyrus imports from Egypt mingled with local clay slabs rustle under your touch, their brittle edges flaking onto your palms in a powdery fallout that irritates like forgotten regrets. And you lean closer to decipher a cuneiform omen about lunar eclipses foretelling royal downfall, the flame's proximity forcing you to recoil as a spark leaps, igniting a corner of the parchment that forces you to slap it out with your bare hand, the burn throbbing in rhythm with your pulse, a sensory struggle that crawls up your arm like molten wax hardening into a scaly reminder of fragility, the wet wool motif mutating into smoke-dampened linen sleeves that cling to your sweat-slicked arms, heavy with the library's humid breath and chafing against the fresh welts as you grapple with these starlit prophecies that twist your gut with foreboding. It's ironic, isn't it? How you're immersed in Ashurbanipal's scholarly haven during the Assyrian Empire's cultural zenith around 668-627 BCE, where scribes copied texts from across the realm to preserve Mesopotamian lore from Gilgamesh's flood myths, to astronomical diaries tracking Venus's path, yet it feels like curating a digital archive today, hoarding files on a cloud that glitches and deletes at random, worse than losing your phone's photo library to a software update that promises backups but delivers digital amnesia. A physical conflagration sparks as a gust from an open window fans the flames higher, tipping a brazier that scatters embers across the floor like fiery insects skittering toward priceless stacks, forcing you to stomp them out in a frantic dance that scorches your sandals and sends pain shooting up your legs. The shocking blaze nearly consuming a medical tablet on leech treatments for headaches. The sad near loss, a light dramatization of how one careless moment erases healing knowledge passed down from Sumerian healers, empathy surging for the anonymous scribes whose lifetimes of labor vanish in smoke. Much like open-source coders today watching their repositories fork into oblivion when servers crash without warning, historians still argue whether Ashurbanipal's library was a genuine pursuit of enlightenment or a tool for imperial propaganda, some citing its multilingual collections as evidence of cultural synthesis, others viewing the omen's fatalistic tone as a reflection of Assyrian anxiety amid growing threats from Medes and Babylonians. A debate illuminated by the baked fragments unearthed in 1850s excavations that survived the city's fiery end. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the vaulted ceilings of the library arch like the night sky inverted, constellations of shelved wisdom twinkling in lamplight, a microcosm where human minds map the cosmos, only to watch stars fall in orchestrated chaos. And here's an absurd tidbit scribes warded off ink blots by sprinkling scrolls with powdered donkey bone ash, believing it absorbed errors like a magical eraser, a bony dusting quirkier than highlighting typos in Word with fluorescent markers that smudge worse than they fix. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about skeleton in the closet, grinding ancestors into anti-mistake powder, sharper than autocorrect's passive-aggressive suggestions but with more existential dust. But the sadness smoulders deeper as you revisit Hammurabi from the Lore Stele, now twisted in these Assyrian copies as a borrowed icon of justice, whose code inspires Ashurbanipal's edicts, yet mutates into harsher decrees for rebels. A surprising perversion where Babylonian equity becomes Assyrian severity, empathy flickering like the flames for how noble intents warp across empires, leaving legacies singed by successors' ambitions. The torchlight mutated into ritual lamps fed with scented oils that sputter and pop, casting erratic glows on the scrolls that dance like elusive fireflies, illuminates the injustice of it all while you, a lowly archivist, grapple with omens foretelling doom through comet trails and planetary alignments. The king hoards this knowledge to justify campaigns. His scholars, safe in palaces as commoners like you, face the starlit sky's wrath in exposed fields, rebellions brewing from ignored prophecies. A modern comparison ignites. It's like climate scientists archiving data on global warming, while politicians cherry-pick omens to delay action. Your nights chilled by reports that predict disaster yet go unheeded, the doom scrolling literal in both senses. Sarcasm crackles again, omens that foretell doom. The ultimate spoiler alert ruins the ending, but nobody changes the plot. No rewind for the finale. As you snuff a wayward ember with your sleeve, the factual ember glows in how this library, housing the standard Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh compiled here, blends Sumerian tales with Assyrian astrology, scribes predicting eclipses with mathematical precision that influences later Greek models, sustaining intellectual continuity amid political turmoil in the 7th century BCE. But the sensory struggle flames higher. The singeing fingertips evolve into throbbing burns that nauseate with each touch of a scroll, the damp linen sleeves turning into ashy smears that irritate like persistent ashes of doubt, amplifying the knowledge's slip as you battle vertigo from the archive's dizzying heights, where ladders creak under your weight. In another poetic zoom-out, the starlit skies beyond the windows pulse like living ciphers, their omens etched in celestial ink that bleeds across the void. A vast library where mortals borrow wisdom only to return it unread. The shocking element blazes when a forbidden scroll unrolls to reveal a prophecy of Nineveh's fall flames consuming the city as Medes advance. The sad foretelling a light harbinger of the 612 BCE sack, empathy overwhelming for the scholars who copied it, their warnings ignored like Cassandra's cursed with truth. Futures slipping away in bureaucratic inertia, you re-roll it hastily. Sarcasm whispering knowledge slips away. The library's leaky faucet drips wisdom, but floods no one's cup. Drier than a scholar's humour after tenure denial. The absurdity flickers in how they stored scrolls in pigeonholed niches lined with cedar to repel moths. A woody anti-bug condo fancier than modern mothballs in closets, but prone to catching fire from stray sparks. Historians ponder if these omens were accurate astronomy or superstitious hindsight, debating whether Assyrian stargazers' predictive models foreshadowed science or merely rationalized failures. But as you extinguish a lamp to prevent further singeing, The doom's weight settles like ash on your shoulders, the injustice smouldering as elites consult stars while you face their fallout. The lamps dim to embers, casting elongated wisps of smoke that curl like vanishing scripts into the rafters, and a psychological chill singes your core. What if grappling with these omens isn't seeking truth but inviting it? The starlit sky's foretellings a mirror reflecting your own unravelling knowledge, leaving you to wonder if doom arrives not from heavens but from the flames we fan ourselves. Did you know that around 600 BCE, Nebuchadnezzar II allegedly built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon as one of the ancient world's 7 wonders, terraced marvels irrigated by elaborate pumps drawing Euphrates water uphill in a feat of engineering that consumed enough labour to build a small city? But skeptics whisper it might never have existed at all, a Greek exaggeration masking the exile of thousands like the Judeans dragged from Jerusalem, whose sorrow watered those mythical blooms with tears instead of rivers. You feel the hanging gardens dripping with false serenity over your parched lips, each cool droplet splashing onto your upturned face like a mocking kiss from the heavens, carrying the faint of floral sweetness that teases your cracked tongue but evaporates before quenching your thirst, evolving the iron tang into a verdant bitterness laced with the pollen of exotic plants that clogs your throat, as if you're sipping the illusion of paradise while exile's sorrow seeps into your soul like unwanted rain on barren soil, turning your insides to muddied despair. The terraced wonders cascade around you in lush tears, vines trailing like serpents from stone ledges engineered with hidden channels that gurgle incessantly, and you reach out to grasp a dangling frond, its waxy leaves slipping through your fingers with a slick betrayal that leaves residue sticking to your skin, a sensory struggle that crawls up your arms like vines entangling your resolve, the wet wool motif mutating into mist-dampened veils of hanging moss that brush your face with clammy insistence. Chafing your cheeks roar as you wander these elevated groves built for a homesick queen, their false tranquility a veil over the city's underbelly, where captives like you toil in chains. It's ironic, isn't it? How you're lost in this Neo-Babylonian splendour under Nebuchadnezzar around 600 BCE, when the empire's architectural marvels like these gardens fed by screw pumps attributed to Archimedes centuries later, but perhaps pioneered here, symbolized cosmic harmony. Yet it feels like scrolling Instagram feeds of luxury vacations today, all filtered perfection, hiding the sweat equity of underpaid staff. Worse than liking posts of influencers in paradise while you're stuck in traffic dreaming of escape. A physical cascade overwhelms as a terrace overflow spills, drenching you in a sudden cascade that soaks your tunic and sends you slipping on moss-slick stones, tumbling down a step where your knee cracks against the edge with a jolt that radiates pain like lightning, the shocking fall bruising your flesh purple and drawing blood that mixes with the garden's runoff. The sad mishap a light echo of how these wonders, irrigated at immense cost, drowned the dreams of exiles forced to build them. Empathy surging for the Judean captives hauled from Jerusalem in 597 BCE, their temple razed and families fractured, much like refugees today fleeing wars only to labour in host countries' shadows for scraps of dignity. Historians still argue whether the Hanging Gardens truly existed, or were a Hellenistic fabrication by writers like Strabo, some citing Babylonian absence in records as proof of myth, others pointing to archaeological hints of massive waterworks as evidence of lost reality, a debate that leaves the terraces suspended in scholarly limbo like the gardens themselves. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the ziggurat of Etemenanke towers nearby like a stepped ladder to forgotten gods, its blue-glazed bricks mirroring the sky's indifferent expanse, where human sorrow rains down unseen amid engineered Eden. And here's an absurd tidbit: gardeners reportedly used elephant tusks hollowed as watering cans for the upper tiers, tipping precious ivory to nurture foreign figs, a trunk-like tool quirkier than using a designer handbag as a plant pot in a viral TikTok hack. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about ivory tower gardening, elevated excess that trunks the competition, sharper than overpriced succulents dying on your windowsill despite all the care. But the sadness blooms deeper as you revisit Nebuchadnezzar from the Exile Whispers, now twisted in your captive's gaze as the destroyer who sacked Jerusalem yet built these gardens for his Median wife Amytis. A surprising tenderness amid tyranny, where his love for her homeland's hills inspired this verdant facade. empathy flickering like the mist for a king whose personal oasis masked the sorrow he inflicted, turning conqueror into conflicted romantic. The torchlight mutated into garden lanterns hung from branches that sway in the breeze, casting dappled glows on the dripping leaves like fireflies trapped in dew, illuminates the injustice of it all while you, an exiled Judean, tend these terraces under guard. Parched lips denied the fruits you cultivate. The elite stroll above feasting on pomegranates, their laughter seeping down like the unwanted rain that soaks the barren soil of your soul. Rebellions stirring among fellow captives who whisper psalms of lament by the rivers of Babylon. A modern comparison mists in it's like working the night shift at a luxury resort. Polishing pools you can't swim in while guests splash carefree. Your sorrow is seeped in as chlorine in your pores. The false serenity a bubble waiting to burst. Sarcasm drips like the garden's overflow exile's sorrow. The ultimate fertilizer grows resentment faster than weeds. No herbicide for the heart's wild tangles. As you staunch your bleeding knee with a torn leaf that stings with sap, the factual verdure unfolds how Nebuchadnezzar, ruling 43 years, transformed Babylon into a fortified jewel with these gardens as crowning glory. Their engineering chains of buckets lifting water, sustaining exotic flora amid the arid plain, symbolizing renewal after Assyrian domination, but built on the backs of 10,000 Judean exiles documented in biblical chronicles. But the sensory struggle vines tighter. The dripping serenity evolves into a constant patter that chills your soaked frame, shivering despite the heat, the moss veils turning into sodden weights that pull at your spirits, amplifying the soul's seepage as you battle melancholy's fog where memories of Jerusalem blur like rain-smeared ink. In another poetic zoom-out, the Euphrates below winds like a tear-streaked ribbon through the city, its waters feeding illusions while carrying away the unspoken grief of the displaced, a river of false promises. The shocking element cascades when a fellow exile collapses from exhaustion nearby, his body crumpling amid the roots like a wilted bloom, the sad wilting a light portrayal of how this serenity's price claims lives daily. Empathy, overwhelming for his unspoken stories of home lost to Nebuchadnezzar's sieges. Futures seeped away in foreign soil. You drag him to shade. Sarcasm whispering false serenity. The garden's greenwashing hides. The rot beneath like eco-friendly labels on polluting products. No rinse for the soul's stain. The absurdity blossoms in how they fertilized with bat guano hauled from caves. A droppings-based boost smellier than composting kitchen scraps in a tiny apartment, but effective for making barren soil bloom falsely. Historians ponder if these gardens were therapeutic for the queen or propagandistic showpieces, debating whether their drip-irrigated unity or merely masked the empire's fractures. But as you resume tending under the relentless mist, the sorrow seeps deeper, like rain infiltrating cracks in the terrace's stone. The injustice flowering as elite's paradise thrives on your pain. The hanging lanterns dim with the setting sun, casting elongated tendrils of shadow that drape like wilting vines across the paths, and a psychological chill drips into your core. What if this false serenity isn't escape but entrapment? The exile's sorrow, a nutrient that feeds the garden's growth, leaving you to wonder if unwanted rain ever truly nourishes or merely erodes the barren soil of hope. You feel the Persian winds carrying scents of foreign spices that whirl around you like invasive whispers, their cloying mix of cinnamon and myrrh assaulting your nostrils and turning your stomach with a nauseating twist, as if you're inhaling the breath of an empire devouring your own, the air thick with the exotic tang that clings to your tongue, evolving the iron motif into a spiced sharpness laced with the bitterness of saffron and defeat, biting like a betrayal swallowed whole, while old glories fade around you into humiliating surrender. The once mighty walls of Babylon now casting long shadows that mock your bowed head. The gusts buffet your face, drying your lips to cracking parchment that splits and bleeds with each forced breath, and you stagger through the grand processional way, where Nebuchadnezzar's blue-glazed lions on the Ishtar gate leer down with frozen roars, their majesty diminished under the approaching shadow of Cyrus's forces in 539 BCE. The winds whipping your robes into frantic dances that slap against your legs like accusatory hands. A sensory struggle that crawls across your skin like invisible insects burrowing under the fabric. The wet wool motif mutating into sand-strewn silks, traded from distant satrapies that chafe with foreign coarseness, heavy with the dust of capitulation as you join the throngs of citizens murmuring alliances born of desperation, bartering loyalty for survival amid the empire's crumbling facade. It's ironic, isn't it? How you're caught in this Achaemenid conquest that absorbs Babylon without a siege, Cyrus entering as a liberator chosen by Marduk himself, according to his cylinder inscription, promising tolerance and restoration of temples, yet it feels like merging with a tech giant today that swallows your startup, rebranding your culture as diverse inclusion while erasing your identity byte by byte. Worse than updating your OS only to find all your files reorganized by someone else's algorithm. A physical gale surges as the winds intensify, hurling market stalls into chaos where spice jars shatter on the cobblestones, releasing clouds of turmeric and cumin that sting your eyes to tears and force you to shield your face, stumbling blindly into a cluster of priests negotiating surrender terms with Persian envoys. The shocking capitulation unfolding as Nabonidus's regent Belshazzar, feasting obliviously in the palace, ignores the writing on the wall. Literally, as per Daniel's biblical account, the sad handover, a light dramatization of a city's soul sold for peace, empathy surging for the Babylonian elites, who once lorded over exiles now facing their own displacement. Much like corporate executives ousted in takeovers, golden parachutes deflating into mere survival packs, historians still argue whether Cyrus's peaceful entry was genuine benevolence or calculated propaganda, some citing his edict allowing Jewish exiles to return and rebuild Jerusalem as proof of enlightened multiculturalism. Others viewing the Cyrus cylinder as spin doctoring to legitimize conquest over a divided Nabonidus regime, weakened by religious schisms. A debate that persists in interpretations of the artifact now housed in the British Museum. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the winds sweep across the flat Mesopotamian horizon, like invisible scribes rewriting history's parchment, carrying scents from the Iranian plateau that blend with Euphrates mists into a fragrant fog of forgotten autonomy, where empires dissolve like spices in a simmering stew. And here's an absurd tidbit. Persian couriers used knotted cords as mnemonic devices for royal decrees, tying messages into quipu-like strings that could tangle in winds, leading to garbled commands, a knotty communication method, quirkier than sending Morse code via carrier pigeons in a storm. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself, talk about tying up loose ends, alliances knotted in desperation that unravel faster than a bad sweater in a gale, sharper than autocorrect mangling your texts into embarrassing surrenders. But the sadness gusts deeper as you revisit Cyrus from the initial whispers of his rise, now twisted in your defeated gaze as the anointed liberator who overthrew the Medes and Lydia before turning to Babylon. A surprising mercy where his tolerance policy allowing local gods and customs to persist masks the humiliating fade of Neo-Babylonian independence into provincial status. Empathy swirling like the spices for a conqueror whose human rights charter hid the chains of tribute and satrapy governance. The torchlight mutated into wind-tossed palace lanterns that flicker erratically, casting wavering glows on the gate's glazed bricks like fireflies caught in a storm illuminates the injustice of it all while you, a once proud Babylonian artisan, force an alliance with these spice-scented invaders whose Aramaic becomes the new lingua franca. Old glories like the Ziggurat's Peak now host Persian rituals, the elite surrendering titles for administrative posts as commoners like you fade into the background, stomachs turning not just from sense but from the sour taste of subjugation. A modern comparison blows in, it's like your country being acquired by a foreign conglomerate, where traditions persist as heritage brands, but decisions come from afar. Your sorrow is seeped in as culture shock after a corporate merger that promises synergy but delivers dilution. Sarcasm whips through your thoughts again, humiliating surrender. The wind's favourite perfume, foreign spices that promise flavour but leave you queasy. No antacid for empire's indigestion. As you seal a desperate pact with a Persian merchant for work in the new regime, exchanging your skills for meagre pay in darricks. The factual breeze carries how Cyrus's empire, spanning from India to Egypt by his death in 530 BCE, implemented satrapies with local autonomy under royal oversight, roads like the Royal Road facilitating communication and trade that blended cultures but enforced tribute, sustaining a multicultural behemoth amid growing administrative strains. But the sensory struggle gusts fiercer The stomach-turning spices evolve into a roiling nausea that cramps your gut with each inhale. The silk shawls turning into wind-whipped nooses that constrict and chafe, amplifying the fade as you battle vertigo from the cultural whirlwind where Babylonian cuneiform yields to Aramaic scripts. In another poetic zoom-out, the Persian plateau looms distant like a vast, spiced banquet table, where old glories are mere appetizers consumed and forgotten. Winds carrying the feast's aroma across borders that blur like dissolving ink. The shocking element swirls when a former rebel priest aligns with the invaders, betraying secrets of the treasury for a governorship. The sad turncoat act a light sketch of desperation's alliances, fracturing communal bonds. Empathy overwhelming for the betrayed who watch their heritage auctioned like spices in a market stall. You turn away, sarcasm whispering born of desperation. The wind's bastard child alliances that smell sweet but rot from within. No freshener for the soul-stale surrender. The absurdity spices up with how Persians used smoke signals flavoured with herbs to send scented messages across distances. A fragrant Morse code smokier than vaping in a no-smoking zone but prone to misinterpretation in gusty weather. Historians ponder if this humiliating fade was inevitable. Persian innovation, or Babylonian internal rot from Nabonidus's eccentric rule, debating whether Cyrus's tolerance prolonged Mesopotamian culture, or merely delayed its assimilation. But as you wander the fading streets, the foreign scents overwhelming your senses, the injustice ferments like overripe fruit, old glories dissolving in the gale's relentless push. The palace lanterns buffet in the breeze, casting elongated wisps that twist like surrendering banners across the walls, and a psychological chill winds through you. What if these alliances aren't salvation, but slow suffocation? The foreign spices not enriching but overpowering, leaving you to wonder if humiliating surrender ever blooms into something sweeter, or merely fades into the wind's indifferent scatter. Did you know that by 1000 CE, the once thriving cities of ancient Mesopotamia like Ur and Nineveh had crumbled into silent mounds of dust and forgotten brick, buried under layers of silt where archaeologists would later unearth over 500,000 clay tablets? But estimates suggest millions more lie lost forever. Their lessons on impermanence echoing through time as empires that spanned millennia vanished so completely that medieval travellers mistook the ruins for natural hills, leaving us to ponder if our own digital legacies will fare any better against the sands of obsolescence. You feel the echoing ruins crumbling under your weary feet, each step sending puffs of ancient dust billowing up to cling to your sweaty skin like a second, gritty epidermis that itches and pulls, turning your flesh into a canvas of forgotten eras where the iron tang on your tongue mutates into a dry, earthen dryness laced with the faint, ghostly residue of long-extinct incense, as if you're tasting the pulverized bones of civilizations swallowed by time. The air heavy with the musty silence of tombs, where wind whistles through cracked walls like mournful sighs from the past. The ziggurat remnants loom as jagged silhouettes against a fading sky, their once majestic steps now eroded stumps that trip you, forcing a stumble where sharp fragments gouge your soles and send jolts of pain racing up your legs, blood welling to mix with the sweat in sticky rivulets that attract swarms of insistent flies buzzing like persistent echoes of unrest. A sensory struggle that crawls over your body like the inexorable creep of decay. The wet wool motif mutating into dust-encrusted shrouds of tattered linen that hang heavy on your frame, chafing against raw spots as you navigate these silent tombs, haunting you with lessons of impermanence, where marble palaces and golden idols have dissolved into anonymity, reminding you that even the mightiest legacies linger only as whispers in the wind. It's ironic, isn't it, how you're wandering the faded footprints of Mesopotamia's twilight from the Parthian to Sasanian eras around 200–600 CE, when Hellenistic influences blended with Iranian revivals in cities like Ctesiphon, preserving cuneiform's last gasps in astronomical texts dated to 75 CE before it vanished entirely. Yet it feels like scrolling through an old hard drive of family photos today, where files corrupt and memories pixelate into oblivion, worse than trying to salvage a water-damaged phone that holds your life's archive but yields only glitchy fragments. A physical collapse hits as a weakened archway gives way nearby, tumbling stones in a cascade that forces you to leap aside, your heart pounding as debris clips your shoulder with bruising force. The shocking rumble burying a nearby explorer's tool in rubble, a spade meant for unearthing truths, now entombed itself the sad burial, a light dramatization of how knowledge seekers often become part of the ruins they chase. Empathy surging for the nameless labourers who built these structures only to have their efforts erased by time's indifferent hand. Much like open-source contributors today, whose code bases gather digital dust in abandoned repositories, forgotten amid newer frameworks. Historians still argue whether Mesopotamia's cultural fade was due to Islamic conquests in the 7th century CE imposing Arabic dominance, or a gradual internal erosion from Sasanian Zoroastrian pressures and environmental shifts. Some citing the Babylonian Talmud's completion around 500 CE as evidence of resilient Jewish scholarship amid decline. Others pointing to the abandonment of cuneiform as a symptom of linguistic assimilation that silenced millennia of voices, a debate that lingers in the fragmented artifacts pieced together in modern museums. In a zoom-out poetic moment, the Mesopotamian landscape stretches eternally like a vast weathered scroll, unfurled and frayed at the edges, rivers meandering through as faded ink lines tracing paths of rise and ruin, where human ambition etches temporary marks on Earth's patient canvas. And here's an absurd tidbit. Late Sasanian scholars used peacock feathers dipped in ink made from crushed beetle shells for transcribing final texts. The iridescent quills fluttering like vain attempts to beautify decay. A feathery flourish quirkier than signing important documents with glitter pens in a boardroom full of suits. You chuckle sarcastically to yourself. Talk about feathering your nest with forgotten pain. A colourful coda to impermanence that fades faster than cheap tattoos under sun exposure. Sharper than journaling your regrets only to lose the notebook in a move. But the sadness dusts deeper as you revisit Cyrus from the Persian winds. Now twisted in these ruins as a spectral architect of tolerance, whose empire's multiculturalism preserved Mesopotamian astronomy, transmitted to Islamic scholars who advanced it further, yet surprisingly accelerated the fade by integrating so seamlessly that native traditions dissolved like sugar in tea, empathy swirling like the settling dust for a conqueror whose legacy haunts as both saviour and silencer, turning liberator into the unwitting gravedigger of cultural distinctiveness. The torchlight mutated into the dim glow of a setting sun filtering through crumbled arches, casting amber hues that waver like dying embers on the debris illuminates the injustice of it all while you, a wandering seeker, grapple with these silent tombs where Mandaean baptismal rites in southern marshes persist as faint echoes of ancient water cults. The lessons of impermanence mock the forgotten pain of Nestorian Christians and Jewish Talmudists who clung to threads of heritage amid Parthian and Sasanian shifts, their communities scattered like the dust clinging to your skin, elites long gone while the masses' unmarked graves whisper of unequal erasure. A modern comparison settles like silt. It's like urban gentrification sweeping through historic neighborhoods, preserving facades for tourists while displacing residents whose stories fade into Airbnb listings. Your weary feet echoing the trudges of those evicted from their own history. Sarcasm dusts your thoughts again. Lessons of impermanence. Time's favourite TED Talk, engaging until you realise you're the exhibit, no Q&A for the erased, as you pry a loose brick free, revealing a faded inscription of a Sasanian fire temple hymn that crumbles in your grasp. The factual residue reveals how this era from 224 to 641 CE saw Zoroastrianism flourish under kings like Shapur-Fin, who built grand palaces at Ctesiphon with vaulted halls influencing Islamic architecture. Yet environmental degradation from overfarming and wars with Rome accelerated the decline. Blending Persian rigour with Mesopotamian mysticism in a swan song of syncretism before Arab conquest in 651 CE, rewrote the script entirely. But the sensory struggle clings tighter. The dusty skin evolves into a full-body itch that rasps with each movement, the linen shrouds turning into powdery veils that flake away like shedding memories, amplifying the haunting as you battle melancholy's weight, where visions of bustling bazaars blur into desolation. In another poetic zoom-out, the silent tombs breathe quietly under the emerging stars, their hollows echoing with the wind's soft lament. A graveyard of glories where pain's lessons etch invisible scars on the soul's landscape. The shocking element crumbles when a hidden chamber yields a skull grinning from the debris, its empty sockets staring as if judging your intrusion. The sad relic, a light memento of some forgotten scholar whose pain lingers in the air like unspoken accusations. Empathy, overwhelming for the countless whose impermanence was not chosen but imposed. Their stories buried deeper than any spade can reach. You back away, sarcasm whispering forgotten pain. The ruin's secret sauce adds flavour to history's bland narrative. No expiration date on the ache. The absurdity lingers in how Sasanians used elephant bones as structural supports in tombs. Ivory reinforcements that trumpeted eternity but cracked under time's weight. A mammoth mistake bulkier than stuffing pillows with dinosaur fossils. Historians ponder if this fade was cultural evolution or tragic loss, debating whether Islamic Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad preserved Mesopotamian math and astronomy or merely repurposed them. But as you tread onward through the crumbling paths, the legacy's haunt presses like the dust on your skin, the injustice of erasure settling as heavily as silt in a forgotten riverbed. The sun's last rays fade, casting elongated silhouettes of ruins that stretch like accusing fingers toward the darkening sky. And a psychological chill dusts your being. What if these lessons of impermanence aren't warnings but invitations? The forgotten pain, a mirror reflecting your own fleeting grasp, leaving you to wonder if legacies truly linger or merely dissolve into the silent tomb's eternal hush. As the echoes of ancient stones fade beneath your slowing steps, the dust settles gently on your skin like a soft blanket of time, the once sharp pains dulling into whispers of memory that drift away on the cooling breeze. Torchlight's final flicker dissolving into the twilight's embrace where shadows lengthen and soften, merging with the quiet halls of ruins that breathe slower now, their crumbling walls exhaling the last sighs of empires into the night air. You sense the environment easing around you, the sweaty cling of dust giving way to a gentle dryness that soothes rather than irritates. The iron on your teeth softening to a faint, lingering echo like the aftertaste of a distant meal shared with ghosts, while wet wool's weight lifts into ethereal mists that float harmlessly upward, carried by winds that murmur softer verbs of release and repose. The sensory motifs unwind gradually, torchlight dimming to a warm glow that fades into starlit serenity, empty chairs of stone inviting you to rest without demand, silent halls echoing only with your softening breath that synchronizes with the earth's quiet pulse, the ruins transforming into cradles of calm where forgotten pain gentles into lessons absorbed like dew on morning grass. Legacies linger not as burdens but as subtle guides, their impermanence a tender reminder that all things pass into peace. The psychological chill warming into acceptance as the environment blurs at the edges, colours muting to greys and silvers that invite slumber, soft breathing becoming the rhythm of waves lapping at distant shores where history's storms have long subsided. Let the details dissolve now, the vivid events retreating into hazy dreams, the ruins receding like old friends waving farewell from a fading horizon, everything easing into a vast, whispering quiet where the last line sounds like a whisper.